What's the fallout from the latest Christian McCaffrey news? Can you safely drop Hollywood Brown in your FFPC redraft leagues? And how do you handle the Dolphins without Tua Tagovailoa for the near and maybe distant future? Plus, the author of the history of fantasy sports and the stories of the people who made it happen, Larry Schechter, joins us to tell us all about the book, all about all the content, and the role the FFPC played in the history of fantasy sports as well. We've got a great show for you. Ferrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Can't stand the pressure. I've seen greater men that need a lesson.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott.
Solace in the scripture. Are we not all our father's sons? I became a man. Nobody ever told me what a man was.
Thank you, Rob. Greetings and salutations to all of you Balkaholics and Ferrelliacs tuning in right now, downloading later, streaming, whatever, and around the world. I'm Eric Balkman. You know me from the FFPC, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. My guest tonight, Larry Schechter, is going to be coming up at the bottom of the hour. My co-host is the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Ferrell Elliott. He'll be joining me shortly. Coming up on tonight's show, we're going to really break down a lot of news that came down through the pike today. Christian McCaffrey, Hollywood Brown, obviously the stuff that happened last night in the Bills-Dolphins game we'll get into as well. If you want to connect with us on X, you can do so at hsffhour. I'm at Eric Balkman. Of course, you can follow Ferrell there at jferrellelliott. Follow the KFFSC at KFFSC Official. And follow Larry Schechter at Larry Schechter. That's LarrySchechter. KFFSC.com is where to learn more about the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. Facebook page is facebook.com/hsffhour, and email us at highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. I love the emails that we get in. You know, a lot of shows, everybody kind of goes away from it. They just use X now, which is fine. But we still get emails on the show, which is great. Send them in now if you have any questions for us. We'll try to get through all the chat room questions, all the X posts, all the emails in our fantasy feedback segment coming up, I would say in about 15, 20 minutes or so, maybe 25 minutes. I want to thank our audio engineer, my best friend Bryce, and of course our producer and mutual friend Rob. If you are looking for more action, by the way, I'll just say this at the top of the show. Unbelievable support from all of you once again this year for the Fantasy Football Players Championship, both online and the live events in Las Vegas. I did not see as many people as I wanted to in Las Vegas, not because you guys didn't show up. You were all there, but I was just so busy with stuff. I had as many conversations as I could have out there. If I did not talk with you, don't take it as a slight. I hope to reconnect with all of you in person very, very soon, including maybe the live events next year. So thank you so much for the support. It was awesome seeing all of you in Louisville. It was awesome seeing all of you in Las Vegas. It was a blast. And a lot of times, I don't get to see so many friends I've made in this industry over the last, better part of 2 decades. And it was awesome to reconnect with many of you. Sean Green popping in right now. I ran into him a few times in Las Vegas. Balky, you saw me, and that's what counts. Yes, it did count. And it was great hanging out with you and talking shop with former guest of the show, Sean Green, of course, a PVJ contestant this year, a guy who's playing in the main event, the Fantasy Pros Championship. Awesome to hang out with Sean Green, for sure. So shout out to all of you for player support for all our contests this year. Thank you. Thank you. Kudos and kudos again. If you are looking for more fun, because we don't have drafts going on anymore until probably January, but we do have the FFPC Weekly Challenge that is going on right now. You can go to myffpc.com and play in it. There's no draft. There's no salary cap. You just pick whatever players you want. The only restriction is you can't stack. Only one player per team. You can play with kickers and defenses or without. $35 or $200 to enter. You can win up to $2,500. Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com to sign up for the FFPC Weekly Challenge. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified every time we go live by clicking that notification bell. One of the players that I did get a chance to hang out with, although quite frankly, not enough. You can never hang out with too much with this guy, is my co-host for this show. You follow him on the X, jferrellelliott, jferrellelliott on Instagram. He is the head honcho over at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, KFFSC.com. Please welcome in Mr. Ferrell Elliott. Ferrell, so good to see you in Vegas and good to see you tonight, my friend.
I barely saw you at all, and I want to complain about it, and it's my fault, and I'm already missing you. You have a lot of responsibility on your plate in Las Vegas, and you draft consistently and around the clock in Kentucky. So it's picking the spots. But, everybody loves talking to Balky. That's Sean Green, hell of a nice fellow. I enjoy meeting him.
Yeah, he was a guy, and like when I talked with him on Friday morning when I was getting set for the first varsity draft that I was proxying, and Sean came up to me and shook my hand, and we were talking. I said, "Did I ever meet you in person out here before?" He's like, "No, only on the stream." I'm like, "I know I met you on the stream, but I'm just trying to figure out if we ever met in person." We hadn't before, and I talked with him at the party. Our friend Cullen Hoffman, who has been on this show before, who is from my hometown of Appleton, Wisconsin. I met him at the viewing party, and then Ferrell. I was so exhausted flying home from Vegas on Sunday. Cullen was sitting in front of me, the seat in front of me on the plane on Allegiant back home to Appleton. Didn't even realize it until we were back home.
You become antisocial as soon as the event is over.
It's terrible.
It happens.
It's terrible. It's one of those things, and I'm not complaining. I would never complain about it, but I do have a lot of work. It is a lot of nights. I wouldn't say sleepless nights, but sleep deprived nights. And you know how this goes with KFFSC. You're in the same boat as me. But we love it. We thrive on it. And I just watching the game. I got to see a little bit of the games on Sunday in Las Vegas before my flight flew out. That was fun. I hung out with my buddy El Grande on Monday night to watch the Jets and Niners. That was fun. And then I watched, after the high stakes fantasy football show ended last night, I got to watch the Dolphins and Bills last night. And it's so nice to kick back, relax, put your live scoring up, watch the games. I'm sure you're in the same boat. Like, what it's like. Everybody's loving it now. And now we're playing the weekly challenge, obviously, with the FFPC, and we're kicking back and hopefully winning some serious money, both in the FFPC and the KFFSC this year.
No, I think so, Balky. And, the first week has consistently been an outlier. This week, I'm calling it just a plain liar. It is very difficult about expectations. We got to project those expectations across the season, and things will look different. My initial response to what I've seen so far is that this might have been the year for you to pay a little bit closer attention to your running back depth charts. People will say I'm shopping for that, but not really. But so far, we've seen a great deal of that. We've seen players. It appears to be the position where players are in mid-season form, and in a lot of the timing, I think we're seeing teams that aren't quite clicking. I saw a lot of that from Lamar Jackson with his receivers in the game. They were rushed, but they looked uncomfortable, and perhaps if they were on the same page, but not on the same sentence, so to speak. Everything looked close, but not quite really in sync.
You bring up the running backs, and I'll bring up your beloved Las Vegas Raiders.
Oh, yeah.
Because Zamir White, I think, let some people down. 13 carries, 44 yards against the Chargers. He did have 2 catches, but only for 2 yards. Then Alexander Madison, actually, 5 carries, 19 yards, 4 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. So that was interesting. I don't know if you can deploy Madison going forward. The reason I bring up the Raiders, Ferrell, is because of this. When I was in Las Vegas, former guest of the show, your friend and mine, John Terry, said, "Look, I was shopping." John Terry said, "I'm shopping in the Planet Hollywood gift shop, and I just see something there that I think would be a great troll mechanism for Ferrell on Friday nights." So I said, "Okay, I'm down." And I was busy. I was going to a draft. I didn't look at what he gave me right away, but I looked at it when I got back to the hotel room, and I'm like, this is fantastic. So tonight I'm going to wear it. I don't know if I'm going to wear it every show, but I will definitely wear it tonight in honor of your Las Vegas Raiders, I have the Las Vegas Raiders chain. Look at that right there.
Perfect for you, Balky.
Fantastic. I'm going to put it on right now. I'll keep it on for the remainder of the show tonight. But this is courtesy of JT, John Terry, Aunt Jemima's Dynasty, Aunt Jemima in general, whatever, AJ, that we need to say. So shout out to John Terry.
I didn't know that, Terry is a man of mystery. I didn't know that he had that kind of good taste. How in the hell how did you get that through TSA? You must have put that in your baggage to get that home.
I think if it's the Cowboys or the Giants, the Eagles, the Niners, they don't get through. But when it's the Raiders and you're at Harry Reid, they just let you through with whatever.
And Zamir White, he's got another tough assignment this weekend. I don't think that Ravens defense is going to give him any free looks. So his season could start out in a bit of delay of what we hoped for. But, it's a long season. We got to stay with it through 14 weeks of league play before we move on to the main event championships. A lot of ups and downs still to come.
Well, regarding Zamir White, as long as you bring him up, this is a player that I think a lot of people started as a second running back or for sure a flex, obviously, in both the KFFSC and the FFPC. When you think about Zamir White going into week 2, Raiders this week are on the road in Baltimore, tough defense. Is it easier for you to sit Zamir White this week than start him, Ferrell?
Oh, sure, because I've got a group of ball players, none of which are on bye and all of which have the various matchups. And what we saw at the running back position was backs that went from 7, 8, 9, maybe even into the double-digit rounds that impressed. And so there's plenty of options there, and you want to take – you don't want to be stubborn just because you drafted a guy higher than another guy. That's you won't put the best matchup in. And there are some favorable matchups for players, and I think the Raiders just have an unfavorable matchup, having to go on the road and play Baltimore, who smarts a little bit after their first game and has had a lot of time to get ready for this one.
Some late breaking news that came out before the show tonight. AJ Brown, according to the Philadelphia Eagles, he is limited in today's practice. We don't know what the extent of the hamstring injury is. But Ferrell, you have KFFSC waivers processing Saturday night. You got FFPC waivers processing Sunday morning. Is Jahan Dotson a guy that you want to add just in case and maybe deploy this week for the Eagles if Brown does miss?
Whew, that's asking a lot, Balky. I'm not so sure Jahan is in that mix yet.
Bear in mind that is a Monday night game too for the Eagles. So this kind of throws a monkey wrench into figuring out, okay, what are we doing with AJ Brown this week?
I think I can find a better spot than Jahan, but I'm not ready to give up on that player yet. I like him, but he's a work in progress in that offense. And I drafted him probably late a little more than I wanted to towards the end. And matter of fact, on some of my teams, he was a early waiver wire casualty.
We found out some bad news out of the Bay Area today with San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan saying not only that Christian McCaffrey is not going to play in week 2, but that the Niners are considering putting him on injured reserve. According to Shanahan, McCaffrey had his worst day in suffering through this injury yesterday, prompting a change from Shanahan previously saying they're not going to put McCaffrey on IR to now saying that he might go on IR. This is bad. If you're a McCaffrey owner, not much you can do. You keep him on your bench. You don't cut him. And when he's healthy enough to play, you play him. In the meantime, Jordan Mason, has he entered must-start territory, Ferrell, knowing that you can start up to 4 running backs in the FFPC, 3 running backs in the KFFSC. Look what he did to the Jets the other night. I'm having a hard time benching him. If McCaffrey is out again, you got to play Mason, right?
No, you should definitely have Jordan Mason in your lineup. What a fantastic performance he had against a defense which we were told was going to be very stout. And Mason, he was ready to play from snap 1, and he got better and stronger during the game, which is what you like to see in a running back. I think that people that really know fantasy football and have done well, I think of Trevor Holt down here in Kentucky. Trevor's been a Mason fan forever. He wants to draft him even when Elijah is healthy. So there's an idea that he's possibly the third running back. Not anymore. And he's great. Yeah, that's a significant find if you have him on your roster. And that's why, one of the KFFSC players sent me a note and said, that's why you handcuff your first round running backs. He's very pleased that he has Mason on the team.
Late breaking news that we found out a few hours ago. Kenneth Walker, Ferrell, is being listed as doubtful with an oblique injury for his week 2 matchup against the New England Patriots. That game between New England and Seattle is a 1:00 game. So we will know by 11:30 a.m. Eastern time whether Walker is active or not. Let's assume he's inactive because it's difficult to come back from a doubtful tag. Zach Charbonnet, how do you feel about him this week, given that he's going to be the man in that backfield, but not the greatest matchup in the world?
Not the greatest matchup, but the front office there has done a good job putting backs together. I love Walker, and Charbonnet I have big respect for. And Charbonnet put up significant numbers last week, given the opportunities that he had. I would not hesitate to get Charbonnet in the lineup, and I might start him in front of some players that have a better pedigree, but may not get the same kind of usage. And there's double-digit running backs. I mean, just so we can turn Terp's crank a little bit. Let's talk about Ezekiel Elliott. No longer looks like he's carrying a mule on his shoulder. He's jumping over defenders, and he had 10 rushes, scored a touchdown. That's the kind of. If you're looking at Ezekiel Elliott, what does he do against New Orleans as compared to how much the team in Seattle must lean on Charbonnet? There's so many good choices right now. Now, when the bye week start, it's not going to be this easy. So make the good ones now and don't sweat them.
Ezekiel Elliott, 10 carries, 40 yards, and he gets in the end zone this past week against the Cleveland Browns, also catches 2 balls for 9 yards. He had the most carries among any Dallas running back. He had the best average per carry of any Dallas running back. And as far as the catches go, he had more than Dowdle, and Deuce Vaughn didn't even catch anything. So, yeah, I think that – now I've heard that this was a ceiling game for Ezekiel Elliott, and I get it. I don't know if I'm deploying him this week, but I'm definitely not cutting him. I'm definitely keeping him on my roster. I want to see where this goes for sure going forward with Ezekiel Elliott. Ferrell, Jameson Williams got in 3 limited practices this week, and he is questionable with an ankle injury. This game for Detroit and Tampa, I believe, I checked it earlier today. I still think this is true. It is the highest total for any game out there this week. Tampa at Detroit, 1 p.m. If Jameson Williams is active, do you have any qualms about starting him based on this ankle injury?
I don't, based on those numbers he put up last week. If they start talking about a snap count, then, yeah, I have some concern. But this team this team is a risk-taking oriented team that trusts their players. And the Detroit coaching staff says, "You ready to go?" The guy says, "Yeah, I'm going to go." Well, prove to me that you can go. So I think he'll get his opportunity. And we waited for that kind of production. We waited for that kind of game from Jameson Williams. Balky, where did Jameson Williams end up in his ADP?
That's a good question.
We were out at the Planet Hollywood, because he's one player that never really had the bounce. Pollard's another player that never really had a bounce. Both of them played very well in this first week. And it's just a couple more examples of players that I really like.
So the last main events that went off the board at the FFPC in Las Vegas, this is including online drafts, the last few days of drafting season, out of more than 4 dozen drafts, Jameson Williams went off at the 903. Wow. Ironically, right in front of Tyjae Spears, who is the backfield mate of Tony Pollard. But Jameson Williams ended up going behind Shakir and Coleman from Buffalo, also Christian Watson. He went ahead of Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. More on Hollywood Brown in just a little bit. Speaking of the Packers, Jaden Reed, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, all questionable this week. Jaden Reed is probably most concerning because he was added with a calf/shin injury, limited him in practice today. Wasn't on the injury report on Wednesday or Thursday. He was there Friday. I think everything we take into account here obviously is, and listen, I'm not buying into what Matt LaFleur is selling. It would shock me. I mean, I know there's a non-zero chance of anything. It would shock me if Jordan Love was out there this week. I don't think he will be, but it's a possibility for me if that happens. But I'm going to go with what I think is most likely, and that is Malik Willis starting at quarterback this week. Jacobs and Lloyd and Reed, let's talk about these three guys specifically here. What do you do with them? I'm still starting Jacobs. Marshawn Lloyd, this will be his first game as a pro. I'm not starting him, even though it should be a heavy run game script for Green Bay. And then Jaden Reed, I think I'm still deploying him as a flex, even though I'm a little bit nervous about this injury. It is a 1 o'clock kickoff, so we'll know at 11:30 whether he's active or not. But if he is active, I'm playing him. Your assessment of the Green Bay offense going against the Colts this week?
I defer naturally to you on the Green Bay Packer information. I will say that all of you had the great luxury of when you had Rodgers at quarterback, you also had Jordan Love. Now you don't have that.
Right.
And I was a little bit I thought the signing of this quarterback was a little bit of a head scratcher. I kind of thought that the team could do better. And now you must deploy him. And he's looked far from ready any time that I've seen him. So that makes me think that the wide receiver that is ailing Reed is a player that I might want to turn away from. And then you start playing in the fact that he is ailing, and you've got a big group of wide receivers, some of which have worked more in second-team reps with this quarterback than Reed has. There's a number of reasons that you can begin to scratch your head and look elsewhere.
I think the thing to keep in mind with this offense, it is radically different with Malik Willis at quarterback this week. This is not the Jordan Love offense. Matt LaFleur made a mistake when Aaron Rodgers tested positive for COVID a couple years ago. He deployed Jordan Love with an Aaron Rodgers game plan, and he realized that was a mistake afterwards. He's not going to do that this time around. The game plan will be tailored to Malik Willis. What does that mean for fantasy? It means that Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs to a certain extent, and definitely Christian Watson, you have to change the way you think about them. I think Doubs and Wicks are easily sits this week. I think Watson, unless you're desperate at wide receiver, should be a sit. Jaden Reed is the one guy out of the receivers that I think could factor into the ground game. I've been saying this all week. It's cute to say you want to run the ball 35, 40 times to protect the weakness of Malik Willis and try to make sure that the Colts aren't able to exploit that. That's fine and good to say. I don't think you're going to be able to pull it off. One of the Packers beat writers who I've had on my local show pointed this out to me, and I know it's a different situation, but when Jordan Love had to start for Aaron Rodgers in that COVID game a couple of years ago, Jordan Love, was throwing the ball downfield. He was pumping the ball deep outs against Kansas City. The game plan was not restricted. Now, I don't think that that's the same case because Love had been in the system for a couple of years. Willis has been in the system for a couple of weeks. By all accounts, Willis is actually a pretty intelligent guy. He's got a cannon for an arm, so he can pump it downfield. And I think I don't want to say it's inarguable, but it's close to inarguable that he's probably more talented with his legs than Jordan Love is too. So I think there are different things that you can do with Willis. That said, I'm not starting Willis. I am starting Jacobs. I'm staying away from Wilson. I'm staying away from Lloyd. I'm staying away from both tight ends. But Reed is kind of on the borderline for me. If it makes sense for you, start him. If not, shy away. I think you'll be okay. That's the way I look at the Green Bay Packers offense this week. Some other stuff we should get into here, Ferrell. T. Higgins doubtful for week 2 against the Chiefs. Did not practice at all this week with the hamstring. Is Andrei Yoshevas on your flex radar in the FFPC?
Sure he is. And he was drafted in most of the leagues that I played in, especially towards the end. I think he's probably the best talent that you've got in Cincinnati to put up. That's why he's there on the depth chart. This is a team that drafted some college players that were really good college players, and they're on the roster, and they missed apparently with Burton this year. They don't have him ready, or at least he's having a problem shifting into the pro game. So this is their guy. And you look at some of these teams with great depth at the wide receiver position, and Cincinnati doesn't have it. And I think that's a little bit of they've got minimum salary players playing behind these superstars at the position. Perhaps we see some lean into the tight end position here, more backs catching balls. Losing a player like T. Higgins, a long strider who's having hamstring problems, that could be something that we continue to deal with throughout the season. So Cincinnati needs some pass catching skills to step up, and Burrow will find them. So I'm not particularly worried about that team. Of course, when you lose a tool like Higgins and then you're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, wow, So
Yeah.
this kid's getting a chance to show it, and with the quarterback talent, the arm talent, and the team's offensive skills, I would be very tempted if I had rostered him even in the 15th, 16th, 17th round. I'd be very tempted to find a place for him in my lineup this weekend.
Yeah, I think Yoshibus is tempting. I think when it comes down to it, it's still more of a desperation thing for me. But the game script matches up for Joe Burrow, Yoshibus, Jamar Chase to have a big game this week. So bear that in mind. The Bears, Ferrell. I was talking with people this week. This is just a gumbo of confusion to borrow a term that you and I have coined. Keenan Allen did not practice any day this week. Rome Odunze, with his sprained MCL, minor sprain of an MCL. Apparently, he's going to test it before the game, and then in game he's going to find out how much pain he can take. But apparently, he's not at risk, or he's at minimal re-injury risk if he plays in this game. That's all fine, but this is a Sunday night game.
Yeah.
I don't like messing around with stuff like this for Sunday night. DJ Moore is a must start for me. I'm playing him everywhere. I do have Keenan Allen in a healthy amount of places, like I've had for like the last 10 years, it seems like. I'm benching him everywhere. I don't want to mess around with it. And Odunze, I'm kind of staying away from starting him as well. I don't want to mess around with this. Are you taking the conservative approach for these injured Bears receivers as well?
Oh, yeah. I've been taking the conservative approach for the Bears receivers even when they were healthy. So I'm definitely going to look the other way now. And their matchup is terribly challenging for them, especially when you look at Week 1's game against Tennessee and realize what the defense did to win it. So I'm with you there, Balky. I'm fading Brad Cruz's and the Cruz family.
They're Bears, yeah. We have Larry Schechter, the author, coming up right now. I shouldn't say right now. In about 3 minutes, he's going to come up. He's the author of The History of Fantasy Sports and the stories of the people who made it happen. But before we do that, I want to get into this game last night with the Dolphins and Bills because a lot of stuff happened. Skylar Thompson is going to be the team starter if Tua Tagovailoa misses time, according to Mike McDaniel. Ferrell, there's not much that you can do with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. If you drafted them this year, you're probably still playing them, Skylar Thompson, or not. Like you're going to roll with them. What gets to be more interesting is Jonnu Smith, who had a nice game last night, 6 catches, I think, 50-some yards. Devon Achane, the impending return of Raheem Mostert. How do you handle the Dolphins not named Hill and Waddle going forward, not only in week 3, but beyond, without Tagovailoa in the lineup?
No, you're going to play those guys. What you've got in Skylar, and it's interesting that they went forward with Skylar as a backup. He's an unusual prospect when he came out of Kansas. He's a player that he's got good shifting movement in the pocket. He's not fast. He never timed well on the 40. He plays faster in his time speed, but he doesn't play fast. And he's a bit like Tua. Tua is talented with his feet, but Tua never made too many yards rushing. He's never been a running quarterback. The ability of this player does not have a strong arm. So does it look like does it look like that you're going to have what we saw from the Baltimore offense in week 1? I've always said that Zay Flowers would be the next could be the next Tyreek Hill. Well, in this quarterback talent and his arm talent, Tyreek Hill could be the next Zay Flowers. He could be catching balls real close to the line of scrimmage and having to beat you with his feet. And he can do that. You're just going to miss those long downfield scores in my estimation. Now, who knows how long this is going to last? I think there's interesting observations at quarterback to make for this team. Yeah, I'm a big Desmond Ridder fan. He's on the practice squad at Arizona. I think I might go get him. Luis Perez, who was a champion, and
the Arlington Renegades
MVP of the UFL, and Luis is not going to beat you with his feet, but he's going to stand in the pocket and deliver a ball with great accuracy. And Skyler lacks downfield accuracy. You can find quarterbacks that have that, and there's a culture here with this team that what happens in our building and what happens in our locker room is no one else's business. So it doesn't surprise me that they look at Skyler and say, this is our guy, we're going forward. So it's a chance for the head coach to prove that he's as good a coach as a lot of people think he is. So it's a fascinating situation. So that's what I think is going on. Am I going to start all those Miami Dolphins that I always wanted to start? Yes. And Jonnu Smith has new life for a player that in the 1.5 per reception, catching the ball close, he's got a good body. He can screen out defenders and he can catch the ball with strong hands and hold on to it. 7 catches for him for 40 yards is a possibility, and those are good FFPC numbers.
Two guys who tied for the team lead in targets for Miami last night were Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane. To your point with Achane, Mike McDaniel's a smart guy, and if Achane is your best playmaker out of the backfield, he's probably going to be targeted a bunch. He caught 7 passes week 1 with Tua Tagovailoa. This past week, last night, 7 catches between Tagovailoa and Skylar Thompson. So he's a must start. I think we saw it in the chat. Yeah, Corey Walters chiming in too. Start Devon Achane no matter what. We said it last night on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. We could not get a good enough argument to say sit Devon Achane tonight. He had a Bafo night, as did James Cook. Ferrell has James Cook with his 3 touchdown performance in the first half of Miami. Has he gained must start status going forward in Buffalo?
Yeah. I think if you had drafted James Cook, you knew you were going to must start him anyway. I don't know too many teams that drafted that player that didn't say this is my starting running back. This is one of my 2.
Now, on the flip side for Buffalo, it wasn't all raindrops, rainbows, gumdrops.
Easy for you to say.
Easy for me to say. Yeah. Curtis Samuel, 1 catch for 3 yards. Keon Coleman, a bagel last night. Is this just a case of Buffalo having that big halftime lead and just riding it out? Or is there something to be concerned about with Samuel and Coleman here? I know you were a big Curtis Samuel guy, as kind of I was in the pre-draft season, or in the drafting season, in the preseason. How do you feel about Samuel and Coleman now after this Dolphins game?
Oh, I'm still locked in on Samuel. I was always a wait and see with Coleman, although you got to love the athleticism. Now, after 2 games, my projection of Samuel for 75 catches looks like a bit of a stretch, but he's the kind of receiver that could go out and catch 10 balls. And, the team got to, on a short week of practice, going down to hot and humid Miami. They got in there, they built a league, they got out of town with a win. And that's exactly what you want to do. They targeted Samuel in the end zone once, a good defensive play by the Dolphin defenders, and the pass was a bit errant. They tried to get Samuel the ball behind the line to get something going for him. The most productive receiver was Shakir last night, but without a score and without a downfield pass. I think Khalil Shakir was about an 11 or 12-point receiver. You know that's going to completely change over time. And if you notice, Josh Allen didn't necessarily try to beat anyone with his feet. He extended the play. He got the ball to the third-string running back. And I think it's encouraging to talk about who we were drafting, I think, in the 13th, 14th, and 15th round, running back Davis out of Kentucky. Yeah. They got him involved in the game, and he showed that he can be a force at the running back position and spell Cook. So it's a big, big win for Buffalo. And yes, everyone should hang on to Cooks unless you're in one of the leagues that I'm a participant in, and in the situation with Samuel. If you want to let Samuel go, I would advise it to probably be a good decision if you're in my league.
Yeah,
but if you're not, you hang on to it.
And take that with a grain of salt, because Ferrell wants to pick him up once you cut him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they call him a late late ad, he was my 11th, 12th round receiver in a number of leagues, and I never imagined that I was going to start him in the first 2 weeks anyway.
Bob Hogan checking in too. Allen may be a better real football player this year than a fantasy football player. Can't disagree with that. I mean, I do see the argument for that. We'll see how it goes going forward as we move through the Bills season to see how many rushing opportunities he's actually going to take advantage of, or maybe he's going to stand back in the pocket. We'll see if Ray Davis is truly going to pick up some of these goal line carries going forward as well. I want to bring in tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen. He is the author of the 2014 Amazon bestseller, Winning Fantasy Baseball, one of the best fantasy baseball players in the world, two-time winner of the CDM Sports National Salary Cap Contest, beating more than 7,000 teams in 2002 and 6,000 teams in 2005. He's been in the USA Today sponsored Labor League 3 times and the Tout Wars Expert Leagues 6 times. One of his keys to success in fantasy baseball is attention to detail. And he actually used that ability in researching, doing interviews, and writing the history of fantasy sports, including fantasy football. He's retired, living in Florida. You can follow him on the X at Larry Schechter. That's LARRY SCHECHTER. Please welcome on to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, Mr. Larry Schechter. Larry, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. So good to have you on, dude.
Great to be here, guys. And
Hey,
I'm surprised the Tom Brady to the Dolphins rumors haven't been starting. You know, he should retire. Skylar Thompson is not leading them to the Super Bowl championship.
Boy, wouldn't that be the most Brady thing in the world? He steps out of the Fox booth and he just becomes the Dolphins quarterback. They not only win the AFC East, but they win the Super Bowl. I'm here for it. Like, I'm excited to see it, Larry.
Yeah,
so you are in Florida, retired in Florida. Are you a Dolphins fan? What are you doing spending your time in Florida right now?
I live in Boca, which is an hour north of Miami. I'm not a Dolphins fan because I'm from upstate New York originally. I also lived in Boston for a long time. I came down here about 8 years ago, had a good retirement going, play golf, no taxes here, no winter. You know, I was not a winter person. I don't like, skiing or any of the winter sports. So it sucked being up north for the first 55 years of my life.
Yeah, I know you're a Red Sox guy. Are you also a Patriots guy, Larry?
Yeah. This year I'm taking a pass on the Patriots, I think, but won't be much to root for there. But I'll tell you, I know we're going to talk about my book tonight, and this actually has to do with my retirement also. The thing is, 2 years ago I decided to write this book, The History of Fantasy Sports, and I thought it was something I could knock out in about 3 months. I thought there's probably 30 people I need to talk to. I knocked this thing out in 3 months of hard work. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It took 18 months of pretty much, it was like a full-time job doing just an unbelievable amount of research, interviewing dozens and dozens of people. And it was 18 months of a full-time job. Then I spent a few months full-time working on getting it published. And since it got published in May, I've been working full-time doing PR, trying to get the word out, get book reviews, and everything. So the point is, I was happily retired. And the last 2 years, I've given myself a full-time job. And there's no end in sight. So I've ruined my retirement.
No.
I used to play golf. Like 4 times a week, go to happy hour afterwards. When I really got into the book, when I cut back, I was playing maybe 2 times a week. Sometimes I was playing just 9 holes instead of the back 9 and happy hour. I play 9 and I leave. The guys in my group started calling me 9-hole Larry.
That's gonna be one. That's gonna be one of my fantasy football teams next year. 9-hole Larry for sure.
And I'll tell you something. This is the first year in like 30 years or so. I am not playing season-long fantasy football. I did not have time to do my normal prep. I've been so busy.
Oh, so, we've got therapy for you there. We can.
I tell you, the book. The book is worth the effort. The book turned out unbelievably well. What happened is my idea was nobody's ever written a book like this. I looked around at the fantasy sports industry. You got millions and millions of people playing worldwide, everything from fantasy football to fantasy Iditarod, fantasy wakeboarding, you get fantasy everything. And, people know there's like more than 50 million people in the US playing fantasy sports. What a lot of people don't know is there are 200 million people playing fantasy cricket in India.
Yes.
And so I thought somebody needs to write a book and explain how did this happen from ideas people had years ago to this huge industry we have now where, here you got people doing podcasts and TV shows like this. And when I started doing it and started doing research, I started to learn some amazing things about the people and what they did. And so I realized very early on, I could write a book, The History of Fantasy Sports, and tell the information, and it would have all the information, who did what when, but it would also come off like a very boring research paper. But as I was learning the stories of people, I thought, man, this is an amazing story, and this other one's an amazing story, and this thing's funny, and this thing's inspirational. So that's where I got the subtitle for the book. The subtitle is "And the Stories of the People Who Made It Happen."
Yep.
And that's what has made the book fantastic. It's people are saying it's fascinating. The Midwest Book Review said it's fascinating from start to finish. Mm-hmm. People say it's an easy read. You got guys who've been in the fantasy industry their whole life are saying, they never knew most of this stuff. So I'm very proud of it. It's like one of the best things I've ever done.
Larry, I got some quick questions for you. And in this political season, I've got to do some fact checking to some of your comments. So far, you're doing really, really well. However, I've been blessed to know several authors like yourself, and I've never had anything but wonderful times spending time with them. And I've got to tell you, 9 holes, 18 holes, 3 days of golf, you guys can always find happy hour. So I've never met an author that couldn't get to happy hour. And it's good that you didn't play fantasy football in the FFPC, the KFFSC this year, because you would have met guys with more fantastic stories and you would still be writing the damn book. So congratulations for not coming. Now, let me ask, how many different sports did you write about the fantasy aspect of that sport in the book? How many sports did you cover?
Well, it's about, like the growth of the industry and the people that started, so people that had ideas for games, and then people would start playing fantasy football, and somebody would say, like Ian Allen of the Fantasy Football Index, when he was in college with Bruce Taylor, they would look and say, well, fantasy football's terrific, but there's no information available. Let's start a magazine. They actually did that it was a college project that turned into the Fantasy Football Index, which is been one of the biggest magazines for 30 years or whatever. Yep. Started as a college project. There were other things that started as college projects. People would say, they would see a need for something. Like when computers started coming about, somebody, one of the first people who learned computers would look at fantasy sports and they say, my commissioner takes 8 hours every week calculating all the statistics and standings. I could do this on a computer. So they would invent something that didn't exist. And so to answer your question, I don't talk specifically very much about it doesn't talk about the rules for fantasy hockey or the rules for fantasy soccer or whatever, but it does talk about people who started companies that did statistics for the football and baseball, wrote magazines, the kind of like the whole industry.
When you were researching the book, when you sat down and had interviews, and Balky will talk about you interviewing the founders of the FFPC, but when you sit down and talk to someone, did you come away with, I've got this guy's recommending for me to go talk to these people, and I've got to see these people? How and what were some of your favorite interviews?
Yeah, it was maddening because I would research something and then that would send me down 4 more rabbit holes.
Yeah, right.
And interviewing, I did most of my interviews were on Zoom, so I could record it and play it back and get what I need. And when I would play it back, I would think like I look like I'm a lawyer doing a deposition. Like you just told me X, Y, and Z, but in an article in 1982, you said ABC. Which, were you lying then or were you lying now?
or just misremembering. You never know,
that's the thing. I mean, I'm asking people what happened like 20 years ago or something. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. One that was funny to me personally is John Zaleski, who had John. He was
former guest of this show. He's been on this show before as well.
Okay, great. Well, he was on the original board of the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. And one of the things I did, there's a chapter about the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. And one of the things I did was try to figure out who was on the original board. And it wasn't that easy to find out who was there and who wasn't. And when I talked to Zaleski, I told them, like, there's certain people I know were there. One of them being Christine Shellhart, who was with Sporting News. But there were like 3 people I wasn't sure. Like, I knew 9 out of the 10 or 12 or whatever it was. So I told Zaleski, okay, I know this guy's there, this guy, and Christina Shellhart. And he's like, oh no, she wasn't there. There were no women there. And the thing is, she was there. I mean, that was like triple, quadruple confirmed. She was there. He's like trying to remember 25 years ago. No, there were no women there. But Zaleski had a great story about that meeting, though. He said that first board meeting, that the 12 of them were sitting at like a long lawyer-like conference table, and Zaleski's at one end, and oh God, I can't remember. One of the guys from EA Sports was at the other end. And before the meeting started, they looked at each other and they started laughing out loud. And somebody else is like, what are you guys laughing at? And the 2 of them simultaneously said, we're at a fucking board meeting for fucking fantasy sports.
But that back in the day, Larry, this was not $1 billion industry.
No,
this is where it started. This is where it started.
Exactly. That's the whole thing.
What prior to the book, what other published work, what other writing have you done?
Well, as Eric said in my introduction, I wrote in 2014, I wrote Winning Fantasy Baseball. This is all my strategy on what you do for fantasy baseball from start to finish. And other than that, this is the only other book I've written. I'm not an author by profession or anything.
Was it ever an ambition of yours to write sports or to be engaged in that industry?
No, when I was young, when I was like a teenager and in college, I wanted to write the great American novel. Mm-hmm. And I wrote something which actually sucked. It was very, I mean, I could say it was terrible. Never got published. It was not good. It's great though. I mean, I've written and published 2 books, which, and the ironic thing is, since college, I've probably read about 6 books in my entire life.
Oh, come on, Larry. You don't have a favorite author?
Larry Schechter's his favorite author.
There you go.
Yeah,
looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
I know that you sat down at least with Alex Kaganovsky from the FFPC, and I'm assuming Dave Gerzak. Can you talk about the role that the FFPC played in your research and in this book?
Yeah, I interviewed both of them about the FFPC, and there's a progression. The high stakes industry had kind of a progression where it started with Emil Tadlik and
Lenny Papano.
Lenny Papano from Draft Sharks. The 2 of them were friends, and they talked a lot on the phone, and they got the idea of doing something. I think it was the story's in the book, but if I remember correctly, Emil called Lenny one day, and he said, "What are you doing?" And Lenny said, "I'm watching the World Series of Poker, and I'm answering some emails and watching the World Series of Poker." The 2 of them had been discussing doing something, but they didn't know what. And when Lenny said, watching the World Series of Poker, Emma was like, that's it.
Yep.
That's it. We got to do like a World Championship of fantasy football. And they started talking about, well, what would we do? It's okay, let's hold it in Vegas. You got to have a large prize. Let's have a big party. Their idea was kind of like, if we were going to have an event like this, what would we want to have? And that's how the WCOFF started. And then from there, you had Greg Ambrosius started the National Fantasy Baseball Championship and the National Fantasy Football Championship. And one thing that's really funny and ironic is when Emil and Lenny started the WCOFF, they placed an ad in Greg Ambrosius magazine. Greg started out, in the magazine business with Fantasy Sports Magazine. So they placed an ad for the WCOF in Greg's magazine. And when the advertising manager told Greg about the ad, Greg looked at it and Greg was like, wait a minute, they want people to spend money on airfare and hotel and a $12.50 entry fee or whatever it was at the time to fly to Vegas. Greg thought this is never going to work. He said, we'll take the ad, but they have to pay up front. And then, months later, Greg went to the event because his friend Grady Tinker couldn't make a draft, and he had Greg come to fill in for him or something like that. I'm not the exact details, but in the book it's exact. So Greg goes to the event and he sees how amazing it is, and Greg immediately knows, I want to do this. After being so skeptical, thinking it didn't have a chance to work. And so then, from there, then you had the WCOF was sold to Gridiron, and your guys, Alex and Dave, who loved playing in the WCOFF.
Yep.
But they didn't like what was happening with Gridiron. They saw it was going in a bad direction, and they decided they were also originally had another friend of theirs, Lou Tranquilli, was involved, and they decided, let's start our own thing. And that's how FFPC came about. And then, of course, there were other ones. Ian Ritchie started one, and there have been other ones. So the book has a chapter about like everything you'd want to have. It's got the precursors to fantasy sports, then the origins of fantasy baseball, the origins of fantasy football, the first commercial games, first books, magazines, websites, radio and TV, the high stakes, that we're talking about now, the Fantasy Sports Trade Association, various miscellaneous things like injury experts. Then, of course, you got daily fantasy sports. You got the worldwide expansion, and you got a bunch of legal issues. This whole chapter about the big legal issues that have faced the industry.
Larry, at some point so obviously this idea came in your mind, you know what, I should write a book about this. You did the winning fantasy baseball thing 10 years ago. It worked out. It was a hit. And then you get this idea and you get the bee in your bonnet and you're like, you know what, I want to take this on. Was there ever at any point when you started your research and you were doing this and you got overwhelmed by like, mother of God, I got to talk to all these people. All this stuff happened. I didn't even realize that happened. Was there ever at any point where like, there is so much more to this than I even realized?
There were several points like that, and I mentioned this in the preface. It's like I said before, it's like I'd find something out and send me down 4 more rabbit holes, and then I'm trying to find out, from people what happened, and I'm getting conflicting information, and I got to try to figure out if I can figure out what is actually true or not. There's sometimes people told me great stories. I'm like, oh my God, this is great. This is definitely going to be in the book. And then I find out later it's not even true. But at the same time, it was so aggravating and so much work. I would learn things. I would learn something, hear some story, and I just knew, oh my God, this book is going to be great. I just knew, like, one story after another. This book is going to be freaking great because this stuff is incredible. Nobody knows this stuff. So that kept me going and getting through it.
Beautiful.
Was there
Balky? Based on what Larry just said, I there's one word that comes to mind for me, and that's sequel.
I was going to ask about that.
Just come on.
Come on, Larry, the first thing I thought of when I was researching this and looking at everything that went into this, I thought about Bill Simmons' The Book of Basketball, which I read. I got it as a gift, actually, from FFPC co-founder Dave Gerzak for my birthday. I don't know how many years ago. I read the whole thing. It took me a long time. It was like 600 pages long. And then I found out there was a sequel to it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm good on the sequel. Like I can't dedicate that much time to this. However, for the history of fantasy sports, this is a quick read. It's a fun read. And I think it leaves people craving more. Has there been any talk about you doing a sequel to this book?
This thing just started. I mean, this has only been out for 4 months, and so no, I don't see there being a sequel. You know, it was like choosing an all-star team, though. You know, it's like there's not room for everything, every deserving. But you know, I don't see there being a sequel. I don't see there's never been a book like this. I don't think there'll ever be a book like this again. Maybe 20 years from now, somebody might want to kind of write some of what happened from today for the next 20 years. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, my motivation for writing it was to make a contribution to the fantasy community, because I knew this was something that was needed, didn't exist. It turned out better than I could have imagined. So I just want everybody, anybody who's listening to this right now, I'm telling you, please buy the book. If you're listening to this, it's because you like fantasy sports. And if you like fantasy sports, you will love the book. I guarantee it.
Well, it memorializes everything that we go through on a daily basis. And everyone that's listening tonight and will download and listen to this show later, Larry, they're either going to know the people that you're speaking about, or when they listen to your stories, they're going to know, I know a guy just like that. So it's going to be really good. It's going to resonate.
Yeah, it will resonate with anybody who's reading this. And I wanted to mention this earlier. Rest in peace, Emil Kadlik, who passed away just a couple of weeks ago too. One of the godfathers of fantasy football. And I know I talked to a lot of people in Las Vegas this past week that just it really hit home, because they wouldn't have been drafting live in Las Vegas without Emil, without Lenny Papano, and he really made it happen, which I know you will bring forth, or you have brought forth in the book for sure. Larry, I have a journalism degree. I didn't really use it because I'm doing a fantasy football podcast on Friday nights, but I will say this: I've gone through the peer review thing. And it's daunting and trying to, research everything thoroughly and make sure that you have an answer to anybody who is questioning your research or anything like that. I know how difficult that is. But I also know that one of the things that I did in my journalism career, it's people. People drive the story. That's what it's all about. And I think that you have really focused in on this, maybe not initially, but as your research went on, it became about people. It became about their stories. You talked about John Zaleski earlier. Is there anybody else in this book that whose story really rang true and resonated for you when you were putting this all together?
Honestly, there are dozens of them. I can name a couple off the top of my head, but there's just so many. Even there are people like, there's a guy named I think his name is Larry Pullman, if I remember correctly. Where he was involved in something, and I looked at it and thought, well, let me just take a look at this. I doubt this guy's going to be of any interest. I doubt I'll even mention him in the book. And I started reading. It's like, holy crap! There's like 3 great stories right here from this guy, and so he's in there. And there's a guy. A guy was in the World Trade Center on his honeymoon on 9/11, and his story of getting out of that hotel. In the twin, I don't know if I said this properly. His hotel was in one of the Twin Towers on 9/11. So he had to get out of this building before it crumbled. And his story of what happened is amazing. And it's not in the book just because it's this amazing story. It's in the book because it's directly related to how this guy ended up getting into the fantasy industry. Yeah. And there's a guy who was in an APA baseball league. APA and Stratomatic are 2 of the precursors of fantasy sports. They're a guy in an APA baseball league for many, many years, and he got ALS. And he thought, he'd have to quit playing. But his wife said, listen, if you want to keep playing APA, I'll do whatever I have to so you can keep playing. And she would go to the games with him and roll the dice and whatnot. And after a few years of this, his condition got worse and worse. It got to the point where he could only communicate through an eye reader and his wife reading his lips. And in that condition, his team came from behind in the bottom of an extra inning, scoring 3 runs to win his first ever APA World Series after 39 years in the league.
Unbelievable.
And you got
Unbelievable.
this guy I mentioned before, Larry. I think Larry. I'm thinking Larry Pullman. I'm not sure if that's right, but it's in the book. But this guy, he was in a very early fantasy football league, and this is when, the Sunday night game, you'd have to wait until the paper on Monday to get the box score. So he gets to the last week of the regular season, and going into the Sunday night game, he's got one player in the Sunday night game. He needs this guy to score a touchdown to make the playoffs. No touchdown, no playoffs. Touchdown, he's in the playoffs. So he goes to work Monday morning. On his way to work, he stops at the newsstand. He buys a paper. He gets to his office building. He goes into the restroom. He gets in a stall, sits in the stall, opens up the paper to the sports section. He sees the box score. His guy scored a touchdown. He's like, yes, yes, yes.
In the stall.
He gets out of the stall. There are three guys standing there staring at him.
It's this is what it creates. This is what fantasy sports creates. Obviously, stuff like this. This is just crazy good stuff, crazy good stories in this book. Larry, did you get a sense? And two more questions for me, real quick, before we bid you adieu on this Friday night. Did you get a sense of what the future of fantasy sports looks like as you write this in 2023, 2022, 2024, publish it in 2024? Did you get a sense of what you think the future of the industry looks like?
Not at all. People ask me that question, and I have no idea where it's going. Although there was, one person that I interviewed. This is in the book. I can't even remember who it was. He said something to the effect of, we've come so far, but if anybody thinks this is kind of like where we're gonna stop, they're crazy. It's gonna really go. It's like, who knows? I wouldn't even hazard a guess.
It's the history of fantasy sports and the stories of the people who made it happen. By Larry Schechter, available on, is that where you want to direct everybody? Amazon.com. I've been putting up the link here. Is that the best place for people to go?
Amazon's the best because if you want any details about the book, the reviews are fantastic. It's like a 4.8 on Amazon, and the editorial reviews are fantastic. That's like the easiest place to get it if you have an Amazon account, but it is available. Most booksellers' websites have it paperback and ebook. Yeah.
We also, we're obviously a worldwide podcast. You are doing a book signing at the Barnes & Noble in Plantation, Florida at the Broward Mall a week from tomorrow. So people can come in, not only get the book there, but get it autographed by you, right?
Right, from 1 to 3. And they're going to be very disappointed with the autograph. My handwriting sucks.
Larry, I should ask you this too. Did you play any fantasy baseball this year, or did the work on this book prevent you from playing that as well?
No, I did play fantasy baseball. I did do that. And I shouldn't have. My teams were horrible. There I was. I had, Spencer Strider at number 1 or number 2. At number 2, I had Spencer Strider at number 2. And at number 3, I could have taken anybody but Acuna or Strider. I could have had Mookie Betts, Bobby Witt. I took Corbin Carroll.
Well, Corbin Carroll's not as disastrous as Acuna or Spencer Strider was.
No,
but yeah, you're right. Yeah. I get it. Listen, Larry, this was such a treat having you on. The book is called The History of Fantasy Sports and the History and the Stories of the People Who Made It Happen. Larry Schechter's book available on Amazon.com right now. Search for it. I've got the link up right there on the screen right now. If you want to get it, it's not expensive. You're talking about less than $10. This is an easy read. And of course, if you are in the Florida area, next Saturday from 1 to 3, check it out. Barnes & Noble at the Broward Mall, Plantation, Florida. Larry will be signing there as well. Larry, we will continue to follow you on X at Larry Schechter, LarrySchechter. Thanks so much for coming on the show tonight, man. I really appreciate everything you do. Keep up all the great work, man.
All right, thanks. I tell everybody, if you like fantasy sports, which you obviously do, or you wouldn't be listening to this.
Right.
Just don't even think about it. Get the book. If you're busy, get it now. Read it when you have time.
Yeah.
If there's some reason you can't get it, put it on your wish list for Christmas gifts.
Oh, there you go.
That's a great idea, which Amazon makes it very easy to do, for sure. Check it out, Amazon.com, the history of fantasy sports and the stories of the people who made it happen. Larry, don't be a stranger. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy your weekend, dude.
Thanks, you too.
That's Larry Schechter, the author of his second book, The History of Fantasy Sports, once again, in the stories of the people who made it happen. Barnes & Noble at the Broward Mall, Plantation, Florida, Saturday from 1 to 3. And, of course, you can pick it up at Amazon.com. $8.99 is what that book is selling at right now.
Wow.
So definitely. And I think it's one of those things, too. It's like, for anybody who's watching this show, Ferrell, anybody who's playing high stakes fantasy sports, I think there is an inkling like you want to know where this came from. How did FFPC come about? How did high stakes fantasy football come about? How did fantasy football come about? How did fantasy sports come about? It's all in this book.
And if you want, you can skip the baseball parts.
You can skip the baseball parts. There's plenty of football stuff in there as well. Glad that John Zaleski made it in there, former guest of the show, and obviously Alex Kaganovsky and Dave Gerzak in there, and Lenny Papano, Emil Kadlik, a host of players. And now Paul Charchian gave it a big endorsement too. So definitely check it out. Amazon.com is where you can get that book. Wow. What a fantastic show we had tonight, Ferrell. I think we helped some people out with their fantasy lineups. I think we helped people out with their fall vacation reading with the history of fantasy sports as well. And I'm so glad that once again, I get to spend a Friday night with you. It's the highlight of my week, not only because it's the end of my week, but I get to spend some time with you, which is always fun, my friend.
What in the hell is a fall vacation? What are you talking about?
I'm going on one.
Really?
Here's the thing. So I never used to go on one, but my wife, God bless her, always schedules a fall vacation. This year we're going, I think, once again to the Bahamas, the second to last week of October, maybe the last week of October. I got to look at that again. But this is what I'll be doing when it's nice and temperate here in Northeast Wisconsin, where I get the crisp leaves and the bite in the air, which I love, the autumn wind, as Raiders fans know all about. Then I have to go to the Bahamas and suffer through the heat, which I don't enjoy.
What days are you going to be on this fall vacation? It
is going to be, I'm looking it up right now. It is going to be, I leave October 19th and I come back October 27th.
I'm going to call you every day you're going.
You do that. I mean, please, because I need the respite.
Yes.
I love my family. I love my kids, but and I'm going with my in-laws too, which is going to be a treat. So yeah, I'd welcome any kind of fantasy football conversation that we can have.
We'll call you twice a day.
I love it. Okay. I love it. Ferrell Elliott, the commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, KFFSC.com. Ferrell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll talk with you again next week, my friend.
See you, Bob.
That is Ferrell Elliott, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank him. I want to thank Larry Schechter, the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, of course, each and every one of you tuning in for this extra special episode tonight of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. We will be back next Friday, September 20th, with the Fantasy Pros Championship Week 1 fourth place team owner, Robert McNamee, who is a longtime viewer, listener of the show. So I'm very excited to have him on and get his thoughts on how he built his team and how he's continuing to make sure that it is competing for that $1 million grand prize this year. In case you missed the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network on the FFPC socials, I had player profilers Jason Allwine last night. Real treat. You can check it out on the BSN socials as well as the FFPC socials. Next Thursday, CH Herms from Optimus Fantasy co-hosts with me as well. That will go from 7 until 9 on Thursday. And I also found out that, not that you want any extra bulk in your life, but if you like Jason Allwine and Player Profiler, I will be the guest co-host of Wake and Take a week from today. That will air at 10 a.m. Central Time. Jason Allwine and myself taking you through everything you need to know for Week 3. In case you missed Tuesday night's RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, check it out on the FFPC socials and the FFPC YouTube channel. 2016 Football Guys Players Championship, $250,000 winner Mike Kuzma was my guest. It was a lot of fun. He's got some teams that are loaded for bear again in 2024. And then this coming Tuesday, one of my favorites, Week 1 FFPC main event, third place team owner Scott Hoyt joins me on the RotoViz HSLD that will air on the FFPC YouTube channel at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. Lineups locking 1 p.m. Sunday. No draft, no salary cap. If you want to play with kickers and defenses or without, you can do that. One player per NFL team. Other than that, you can pick whatever players you want. $35 or $200 to enter, and you can win up to $2,500. Go to myffpc.com to play in that. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live. Good luck in week 2, ladies and gentlemen, in all your FFPC leagues and all your leagues in general. Your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Ferrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
Once again, it is the history of fantasy sports and the stories of the people who made it happen. Available on Amazon right now, $8.99. Definitely worth your time. Check it out, from Larry Schechter. So good to have him on tonight. And I think for anybody who is playing high stakes fantasy football, anybody with a curious mind, anybody who loves to learn will love this book, because without the stuff that happened in this book, I wouldn't be talking with you right now. So check it out. History of Fantasy Sports and the People Who Made It Happen on Amazon.com. That's the best place to pick it up. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time with Robert McNamee. Enjoy your weekend and good luck in week 3.